And the only thing I'm really concerned with is the charges that were brought to Mr. Zimmerman, the second-degree murder charge. And the reason why I'm on your show tonight, because you are an expert in the field of psychology, and in the charge, the murder charge itself, there has to be a propensity for depravity of mind. And I looked it up in the law library today, and I myself would like to hear it from you, what your definition of depravity of mind is.
Well, listen, let's be clear. I'm an internist addictionologist, and the depravity in question here is something more of a legal question rather than a psychological question. I had Mark Geragos on last night. I asked him that very same question. And I have Lisa Bloom standing by. I'm going to ask her the very same question, because the courts, the legal system has a specific way of looking at it.
It says horrible and inhumane acts and of a immoral turpitude. I mean, it was very verbose. So I would like to hear y'all's interpretation. I'd love to.
Well, Frank, let me ask something. Can I bring in Lisa Bloom, an attorney? If you're okay with that, I'll bring her in to answer that very question. I've got her sitting down if you want. Okay, so
yes,
I will welcome to the program. Okay, cool. So here we have Lisa Bloom. Lisa Bloom, thank you for joining us. And so depravity. And let me just say what I discussed with Mark Geragos last night was what I asked him was, is depravity something that can happen in the moment you're pulling the trigger? Can it be a split second of depravity?
Yes.
And he said yes.
Yes, it can. Now, depravity legally is different than depravity in a mental health form. So you're right about that. And
depraved, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Lisa, but depraved to me means, inhuman. Let's face it. Well, no acknowledgement of other people having feelings, treating other people as animals.
Right.
And
you're on the right track. Depravity legally generally means a callous indifference to human life, that you don't care if a person lives or dies. You don't care if they're harmed or not harmed. And Frank, you may have looked that up, and there may be different definitions in different cases, different legal contexts. But when we're talking about homicide, which is what we're talking about here, first-degree murder is the intentional taking of a human life. That's not what George Zimmerman's been charged with. Second degree is a lesser degree of intent. Perhaps he didn't intend to take the life, but he just didn't care. He had a depraved indifference as to whether that life was taken or not. That's what he's been charged with.
I disagree. If you listen to the 911 tapes, which in actuality aren't really 911 because George called in on a non-emergency line, and everybody's talking about 911. He called in on a non-emergency line. The dispatcher clearly, and I looked up the charging affidavit today, where he said that, where it was stated by Special Prosecutor Corey that he disregarded the dispatcher's request not to continue his surveillance of Trayvon Martin. And I heard it clearly, so did the rest of America, where he says, okay. Did you not hear that?
Listen, I'm not saying he's guilty. I don't want to be misunderstood. I'm just saying that's what he's been charged with. It's going to be up to a jury to decide whether he's innocent or guilty.
The charging affidavit that was just released 1 hour ago.
Yes, I've seen that.
I heard him say okay.
Please, I'd like to hear your
I heard him say okay, but I didn't. it seemed like he continued to pursue him. That's how he got himself into trouble.
How do we know that? How do you know that?
Well, we don't.
How do you know
he
continued to pursue him? Thank you. Okay, thank you.
That's something I assume we're going to see a timeline from Mr. O'Meara at some point, and I'm sure those are the kinds of things, Lisa, he will take issue with.
Listen, Frank, I think you make a very important point, and that is that there should not be a rush to judgment here. What we have is one side of the case in these charging affidavit, which is the way that the criminal justice system proceeds. We have law enforcement and the prosecutor's side. We don't have the defense side yet, which is why none of us should rush to judgment. And in fact, some of the facts in here might be disproved at trial.
And let me say, from my perspective, as somebody sitting in California, Frank, it looks weird to the rest of the country that Florida has these laws, and it looks like an injustice, and that's what it looks like to us all watching. And if people hadn't spoken up, this wouldn't have happened. Your friend probably wouldn't have been arrested. The reality is, but it's a weird sort of the circumstance of Florida that in other states he would have been arrested that night, right?
Yeah, and I'll say this, Frank, also on behalf of you and your friend George Zimmerman. Now that I've read this just released probable cause affidavit, we should be clear. There is no evidence alleged by the state that George Zimmerman made any racial comments about Trayvon Martin, any racial epithets, or had any racial animus. There are no hate crimes alleged in this case. I think that's important to point out, given what's going on. But well, you're welcome. But let me say one other quick thing. But he is accused of saying these a-holes, these punks, and that to me is getting close to, you know, these people. What do you mean these? What category is this stranger being put in with a group? This is somebody, Trayvon Martin, that George Zimmerman did.
I respect what you're sharing. I respect what you're sharing, and on Nancy Grace, we went around and around on this 100 times, and when I first heard that, prior to Nancy's show, I came up with the cold theory, C-O-L-D, and she kept, you know, chanting or ranting. It was the other C word, and you know, the CNN experts ran it and they enhanced the audio, and one day it's cold and then the next day it's punks, but it was never the other C word.